Hi bio students, so this is my second and last video for this week. So in this video we're going to do two different lectures just because they're both pretty short, and then I'm going to show you the Google forms that you need to fill out. So in total you have 2 videos and 3 forms for this week. So we're just going to hop right into it. So for this video, we're going to be talking about population and growth patterns as well as ecological succession. So first we're going to talk about population and growth patterns. So our key concept is populations grow in predictable patterns. So changes in a population size are determined by 4 major things. That's immigration, birth, emigration, and death. So immigration is when things are coming into an ecosystem. We know what birth and death is, so it's more so like, is the birth rate higher than the death rate, or is the death rate higher than the birth rate? And then emigration is when things are leaving, so they are leaving that ecosystem. Immigration, things coming in. Emigration, things leaving. So those are the main things that determine the population size. So there are different types of population growth or decline that is based on available resources. So our first one is called exponential growth. So this is when a population grows very rapidly because of the abundance of resources that are in that area. So if there is a high abundance of resources, that means that there's more things available for that ecosystem. So maybe more things will come into it because of those resources, or maybe more births would happen. But it's like a very quick incline. It happens rapidly. So we have our little chart over here. So you see that this is not a ton of time. I know they didn't label it, but short amount of time, and the population just skyrockets. So maybe this would be like rabbits in a field, like let's say it's getting around to harvesting season. So maybe I've never been on a really on a farm, so I guess I don't really know if this is true. I'm just trying to make an example. Maybe it's around harvesting season and rabbits start showing up a lot. So that would be like an exponential growth. We have another type of growth that's called a logistic growth. So this is when the population is starting to face limited resources there. So we have here logistic growth, so it's kind of like a somewhat like an S, more drawn out than just that. So you see our time here, it's kind of starting to be like an exponential growth here, but when it's starting to reach its carrying capacity, and you'll say this on the next slide too, but I'll say it here. Carrying capacity is when an ecosystem is starting to reach the maximum number of organisms that it can hold. The growth starts to pan out, because if it goes above that, then those organisms aren't going to be able to survive because it's starting to reach the number of resources that it has. So it starts to flatten out, kind of like flattening the curve. So like I just said, carrying capacity is the maximum number of individuals that a environment can support. So when we have like exponential growth, or maybe something is over its carrying capacity, a population crash can happen, and that's a very quick and dramatic decline of the population over a very short period of time. So we have fish kill events versus the rainfall, and if that goes away, you'll see the bottom, and that's the months. So as you can see, it's kind of on a trend of from January to July. That's kind of like exponential growth there. But then after July, we have August through December, where it has a very quick population crash. And that kind of correlates to the rainfall. So the rainfall from January up until June is on a like upward trend. And then in July, like that rainfall it declines dramatically. So because of that, the fish population is also going to decline as well. So usually population crash happens after some sort of exponential growth. So next we have some ecological factors that can limit the population growth. There are two types that we are going to be focusing on. So a limiting factor is something that keeps the size of a population down. So we have a density dependent limiting factor, and this is affected by the number of individuals in a given area. So density dependent, it depends on the density of the area. So our density dependent limiting factors are affected by the number of individuals that are in a given area, and these things, like these type of limiting factors, would be like predation, competition, and parasitism and disease. So these three things really depend on how many individuals are in a certain population. So we have a graph here that shows the number of moose versus wolf in a certain ecosystem. So you see the moose is the orange and the wolf is the blue. When there are more moose in the area, that means there has to be a decline in the wolf population, because the wolves could be the predators of the moose. And when there are less moose in the area, there are more wolves. So it's kind of, they go off of each other. And in the situation that we are in right now with COVID-19, that really depends on our population as well, because higher population, the more people are going to get it. Kind of like in the case how right now Black Hawk County is the county in Iowa that has the most number of cases. And then we have density independent limiting factors. So density independent does not matter what the size of the population is. It's going to occur no matter what. So these would be like unusual weather patterns, natural disasters, and human activities. So it would be like a tornado. A tornado is not going to decide where it's going to go based on the population. It's just going to go wherever. So it's not going to be like, oh, we're just going to bypass Gilbertville and go towards Waterloo because Waterloo has a higher population. No, it's going to happen regardless. And tornadoes will happen in the middle of a field that doesn't have anybody in it. So density independent does not matter about the population size. Density dependent does. So that's it for our population growth patterns. So this ecological succession one is literally going to be 3 slides. It is super fast, okay? So ecological succession, this is a process of change in a species that make up a community. So ecological succession needs to happen after a disturbance in a particular ecosystem or environment. So succession is like, it can build back up, like something happens in the ecosystem and then it starts back up again. Depending on what happened or where it happened, there's 2 different types that can happen. So it can regenerate or create a community. It has biotic changes, so changes in the living things there. Communities can be regenerated, or new communities can arise in previously uninhabited areas. So our first type of succession is called primary succession. So this starts in an uninhabited land, and it begins by a pioneer species, such as it could happen with lichens or like shrubs. So plants that can survive and grow in that area when it's a barren land, it's kind of like a rocky area, they start to grow in that area. And over hundreds of years, so kind of like evolution, this doesn't happen overnight. Over hundreds of years, other species start to move into that area, and then it becomes a habitable land. So that's primary succession. Our next type is called secondary succession. So this takes place in a once colonized area, but it got damaged. So there are actually some areas of trees that depend on secondary succession in order to regrow its population. So let's say we have like a forest fire here. So this will be a lot quicker than primary succession because it's already in a land that was once inhabited by something. So since it already has like the pioneer species there, and maybe the ground is already like broken up, the soil's good, it'll be really quick. So, and also because of this, they have like their previous seed banks, root systems, and their fertile soils. So we only have two types. Primary starts in uninhabited land. It takes a very long time. Secondary starts in a once colonized place that was damaged maybe by some sort of natural disaster or event, and it goes by really quickly. And that's it for our succession. So we're going to look at the Google Doc here. It's going to start off, and it goes in order of how this video was. So it's going to ask you some stuff about population and growth patterns. I don't remember if you watched this video in class, but still watch it regardless because it's going to ask you what type of growth it is showing. And then you have 2 questions over succession. So along with this, I'm also going to have you complete a Google form over this. This is called Typhoid Mary. So this was a very interesting case that happened a while ago. I like to show this video because it does show a density-dependent limiting factor, and it's kind of going along with our situation right now with COVID-19. So this story follows a young woman named Mary Mallon, who was a carrier of typhoid fever. So it's a really interesting story about how she was somebody who did not show any sort of symptoms of having typhoid, but was able to spread it regardless. And her actions are very interesting to learn about. So I want you to answer these 3 questions, and please note that I said here, I'm going to grade this later. Your points will be determined by how much effort and thoughtfulness went into each answer, and this document total is worth 10 points. So make sure you are doing thoughtful answers when you're doing it. So you can tell me something interesting you found in the video, and how do you feel about Mary Mallon, Typhoid Mary? How does someone contract typhoid, which they talk about in the video? And how does this story of the spread of typhoid kind of relate to our current situation? I just am curious to see your thoughts on that. All right, so after you finish this, that's it for the week. And if you watch this before our Zoom session, I'll see you then. If you watch it after, I'll see you next week. All right, bye guys.